I want to now invite you all to join me in welcoming our next speaker. So many of you have heard of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. This organization set up by our government, the Israeli government, and mercenaries, including an anti-Muslim biker gang called the Infidels Motorcycle Club. That's a real thing. Look it up on the BBC. They formed this entity supposedly to provide aid to the Palestinian people, even though the aid is sitting there waiting for the Israelis to just lift the blockade. And on a daily basis, we saw Palestinians being gunned down while starving and desperately seeking food. One of those men who was there serving the GHF had the courage to leave, not only to leave, but to come back to America and tell members of Congress, tell the media, tell the public the crimes that he witnessed there, knowing full well the smears that would be leveled against him, the career opportunities that would be destroyed, but he did it anyway because he is a human being who had not lost his humanity. And so I want you to join me in welcoming that man, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, to the stage.
All that is required for evil to triumph is for the good to do nothing. I feel unworthy to be on this stage and to speak and to be a voice of the Palestinians because they truly are courageous. I wish I had their courage. I wish I had their strength. One day, I'll stand before my Maker, and God will ask, I gave you a voice. Why did you not speak truth? I gave you courage. Why did you choose cowardice? I gave you a mind. Why did you not think for yourself? That's not the conversation I'll have with my God. I will stand for the truth and tell the truth and be courageous for a beautiful people that have been voiceless because of the evil that chooses to ignore their plight. What I experienced in Gaza and the Palestinians that I met and what I saw cut me very deep. I will not mince words. What is happening in Gaza to the Palestinians is a genocide. Starvation, famine, disease, displacement from homes, and worse, dehumanization. What is happening in Gaza and what the Palestinians are suffering and enduring is a stain on humanity. A stain that will not be washed away, and a stain that those that stand on the wrong side of history cannot hide from. Many of you may have seen me on September 3rd when I went to Congress and stood in the Foreign Affairs Committee and I was arrested. That was one of the proudest moments of my life, and I get a lot of flack from the veteran community for that, but I'm going to say why. Because when I walked into that chamber and I stood up and I looked Senator Risch in the face, an AIPAC recipient, and I said to him that the United States government is complicit in a genocide. Abide by your oath to the Constitution. And I held the Constitution up with my right hand. And he looked at me and he said, off to jail. What that should show America is that there are politicians in our government that are compromised. compromised by money, compromised by power, compromised by the promises of what AIPAC or what a foreign government will provide. That's not American. Every side, bicameral, bi-house, every side of the aisle, up, down, left, right, wherever you fall, should stand against that. All of us. Can I please have the picture of Basma? I just want you to look at that for a moment. It is very important to me to convey the humanity. We see day after day on television the bombing and the starvation and the suffering and the dehumanization of a beautiful people. But I want you to look at this picture. This young girl, her name is Basma. That means smile. Appropriate. This young girl, this was at distribution site number 4, which is in northern central portion of Gaza near the Nesarim corridor. This site is no longer operational. It's now a base for the offensive operations into Gaza City. And this young girl showed up at the site, and like many of the children or the elderly, by the time she got there, there was no food left. And she showed up with her purple backpack, with no shoes, and she came for her family to get whatever food that she could. This young girl, braving a combat zone, without water, without food. And when she showed up and there was no food left, she came up to me, an American, armed with weapons, and she walked right up to me and she said, this was through a translator. Now, this translator who was there with us was Palestinian, but he had lived in America. He was a doctor, lived in Chicago, lived in Europe, went back to Palestine to support his community and to be there. So he spoke English very well. And the conversation we had, she steps up to me and she says, "Where is the food?" I said, there's none left. She says, you are failing. I came here for food and I'm not leaving without it. This young girl. Some of the contractors, we had bought items to give to some of the children and to some of the women that got there at the end of distribution because there was nothing left. But also the food that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is providing are all dried parcel goods. They're not meals. We're not providing them meals. We're providing them rice, beans, pasta, and no water. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the United States government, provides no water. And so I gave this young girl this package of cookies, and in this package there was like individual packs, and she opened it and she started handing it out to other children. Not taking it for herself, but handing it out to other small children. And I had given another package to her. And then the Israeli occupation forces began firing at the crowd as they left. And I instructed her, I was like, you need to go home, you need to go home. And she has her backpack and she was putting these cookies in her backpack and she pulls out a picture and she shows it to me. And she stands there in front of me and she says, this was my home. Right here. That was my school. That was my mosque. This is where I played with my friends. This was my home. And you helped take it away. That cut me deep. And then I said, you need to go home. You need to go home now. And she looked at me in the face, eye to eye, and she said, you go home. That's the truth. That's the Palestinian that the world should see. Beauty, strength, courage. That's courage. So I would ask for all of you here that your voice matters. Every voice matters and every day matters. Tomorrow is too late. The people in Gaza need us. They need our voice and they need our truth. And to stand up against those that are corrupt in our government that would rather take money from a foreign nation than stand up for the values of our nation. That is un-American and unacceptable. Every voice matters. I'm truly humbled to be amongst you this evening and to share my story. And it's not my story, it's their story. It's the truth. And if we don't stand against this as a nation, one day everyone will look back and say that this was wrong. Believe me, they will. It's not just about being on the right side of history, it's about being on the right side of humanity. So I thank you for welcoming me into this movement, and I thank you for welcoming me to share the voice of these beautiful Palestinians that their voice is dimmed by evil. Let's not let that be the case. Thank you.
Take a question. So, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you for speaking up. May God reward you. May God guide you. And that's all I can really say. Thank you, brother. We have one more guest, and we'll ask some questions of him and Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar. While they're setting up you go ahead and set up the stage. I'd like to invite anyone who has a question for Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar to go ahead and ask it now, and I'll let him answer that while we set up the stage for the last event. Would anyone like to ask a question of Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar? Yes, we have a question there. Okay. And then anyone else? I'll take two. Okay, I'll go here and then here, inshallah.
Thank you very much for speaking up. There's a movement in London and also here in the Washington, D.C. to get the United Nations General Assembly to invoke Uniting for Peace, to get a protective force into Gaza to protect the people, rebuild, and provide humanitarian aid. Can you speak to that? And if you're supporting that, can you please encourage everyone to do that?
UN Resolution 377A. I was actually in New York City on the 15th speaking at a protest and a movement for that very resolution. I stand behind that resolution very strongly. Yesterday, the United States vetoed another ceasefire move 51 times since June 5th. Over this past year, the United States has used its veto power as a permanent member of the Security Council 88 times. Until yesterday, 50 of those were for Israel's desires to continue the war. Yesterday, we did it again. The day before that, the United Nations came out and said, yes, this is a genocide. And yet, the United States, again, vetoed a ceasefire. This is a bill or a resolution that everyone can get behind. What it does is it takes away the veto power of the 5 and allows the voting members of the 193 nations to vote on what the United Nations want, not the power of the 5. We've shown that we're not responsible with that power. Our veto power has been bought. Believe it. Israel has bought our veto power. And they pay for it every time we use it. And we do. And it's disgusting. And we shouldn't stand for it. So I support that resolution. I stood for it on the 15th. We're still trying to get it pushed through, but it's important. And that's something that everyone can, that's where you can actually have an effect.
Thank you. We'll take one more question.
First of all, I want to thank you for doing what you did. It takes a lot of courage to be able to take this position, especially coming from a military background, where there's a culture that pushes the opposite. When you think about your colleagues and others that are in the same shoes as you, same situations, what is preventing them from making that shift and speaking out? Like, do we have to pull them in and say, hey, make the change with us? What's stopping them from having the same level of courage that you had to take this position?
I believe that there are many of my peers and comrades that do wish to speak out, but I can't speak for them, but it is scary. I mean, I've received death threats. I've received threats against my life, threats against my family, threats to my well-being and my income, smeared in social media. The way I see it is that I don't care. It doesn't bother me. There are others that have spoken out and others that will speak out. Some are slower than others to come to realizations or conclusions. But also, the power of the Zionist narrative and the grip on Western media is hard to overcome. I, too, was a victim of that. When I first got into Gaza, or first went to Israel before we went into Gaza, the Israeli occupation forces took us to various sites from October 7th and filled us with this hate. The entire apparatus of the group that was paid for security in Gaza is the Infidels Motorcycle Club. You can Google them, look it up. The Infidels Motorcycle Club stand for two things: to fight jihad and to annihilate all Muslims on the earth. This is the organization we have feeding people? They shouldn't be feeding anybody. The narratives are very strong. Perverse incentives, money. They're paying them a lot of money. And it's very easy to fill your pockets and look the other way. Just ask our members of Congress. Because that's what they do.
Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate your willingness to continue to be in the fight, and we look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead, God willing. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you.